Toyota, Ford, GM, Kia, Honda, they're all fucked. I'm driving to Florida right now in my Tesla Model 3. I'm actually not driving. The car is driving itself on autopilot. And those companies that I just mentioned are going to be going out of business or doing another business over the next several years. Whether that is 3 or 4 or 5 years or 10 years, they are going away in the current form that we know them. And we're going to talk about all of that in this video and lay out the argument of exactly what is happening. So, if this is your first time here, what's good? My name is Sam. For those of you who are returning, it's good to freaking see you. Let's get into this video. So, we're going to start with the annual production of vehicles and lay out what that number is and why that number is going to be collapsing. And then we're going to also talk about a little bit about the cost curves related to EV vehicles. And then we're going to dive into some of the explicit and the implicit costs associated with the car driving itself as I make this video here. So, if we take a look at traditional OEM ICE vehicles, internal combustion engine vehicles, we've got maybe an average life of around 150,000 miles. That would be assuming that somebody takes relatively good care of their vehicles, doesn't get into an accident or anything along those lines. And when we take a look at the total global production of cars, of around 90 million vehicles, just over 90 million globally, then that would imply that we have around 15 trillion global miles driven per year. So, if we've got that number, right, we just backed into it from the data, around 150,000 miles on average per vehicle of those type of vehicles, right? And then we know that on average there's this many produced, then we can get an estimate of the total number of miles driven for the new vehicles that are coming off the line. This is not including everything else that's already, like that back catalog of vehicles that is already sitting on the roads. So, now, going forward, right, this Tesla Model 3, I probably would expect somewhere in the neighborhood of 500, 600,000 plus miles of this vehicle. There's already several vehicles out there that have over 1 million kilometers on their Tesla. And the vehicles are getting better and better each new quarter. Not annually, not every 6 months. Tesla vehicles are getting better every quarter with the progress that Tesla is relentless with squeezing out efficiencies and making things better, as time goes on. So now, when you have a vehicle that comes out and it has 500,000 miles, or that's the life, right? The battery and the car in general is going to last around 500,000 miles. What happens? Well, if you think about it from a fleet standpoint for a moment, I own a couple businesses, and if I've got a landscaping business, right? And if I have a truck that I need to utilize for this landscaping business, and I'm gonna get 150,000 miles on that, then in the course of one Tesla, I would need 2.5 ICE engine vehicles, right? Because one lasts 500,000 miles, the other one lasts 150,000 miles. You just divide that in there, it's 2.5, right? So when you think about it, roughly, when you think about it, the total number of vehicles on a global basis is going to collapse. And if we take that same estimate of around 15 trillion miles that are driven annually for new vehicles that are produced, and we divide that 15 trillion by 500,000 miles per new vehicle from Tesla, you get a long-term rate of vehicle production around 30 million, which, right, that's like 67% less than what's currently being produced, right, on an annual basis. You're like, this guy's fucking nut job. But when you think about what is actually happening here, Jeff Dahn, who is the lead researcher for Tesla, has already done talks, I don't remember when it was, but at a university recently, where he was able to cycle their new battery, not in the vehicles today, for 15,000 cycles, which would equate to around 2 million miles driven. So we'll say that's not practical, right? We'll just call that, we're going to cut that fucking shit in half to start with and just call it 1 million. Right? And then we'll just cut it in half again and just say you can reasonably easily, people don't take care of the battery pack, people don't do anything. And he's talked about a full cycle. So that means from 100% down to 0, 100% down to 0. That's going to be your full cycle on a battery. That is not good for the battery in general. With the new chemistry that goes into the vehicle, within the batteries that Tesla's producing, if you're able to get 15,000 cycles and get 2 million miles, then having this vehicle get 500,000 miles is going to be the low end. That number is going to be increasing. And that leads us to what actually is going to happen with the auto market, right? The number is definitely going to collapse. And then on the bottom side of the market, right, because we have the total macro view of the market is going to be collapsing over the next decade substantially. Like they're just going to be fucked. The people who work in the auto industry are going to be fucked, and that is a good thing, because we're going to talk about that in a second. That is a really good thing. You figure, globally, that's several million or maybe a couple tens of millions of people in the peripheral suppliers associated with the OEMs that are producing vehicles. That's actually a good thing, because what ends up happening as there's something called Wright's Law, and Wright's Law does not use time as a predictor of the reduction or in cost or the increase in transistors like Moore's Law does. Wright's Law uses a more practical approach. When you take a look at Wright's Law, it's the total aggregate production volume. When that doubles, there's a constant decrease in the cost associated with something. So we're on Wright's Law appears to be more accurate in predicting the cost declines than Moore's Law does, because it just makes sense, right? Just every 2 years. But what if the pace of change changes with like Moore's Law versus the pace of which something changes with Moore's Law versus the aggregate production changes? It just doesn't make, when you look at it, the practicality of Wright's Law versus Moore's Law, Wright's Law makes far more sense. So you can see this Ford going by over here on the left, and there you get all these views too when you're driving by making content here, and they actually have to pay attention to the road, and I can just keep an eye on it as I'm driving along here. But the cost is coming down. Now, we have costs coming down in terms of the total vehicle production, but also the most expensive thing in the vehicle, which is the battery technology. So we've got explicit costs and we've got implicit costs. So implicit costs are the opportunity costs, which we're going to talk about in a moment, but the explicit cost, the actual cost of the vehicle, currently, if you just look at it over a longer period of time than fucking 12 months, a Tesla significantly costs less. I have had this vehicle for about 12 months or about 11 months now or so, and I have 16,642 miles on this car. And how much I've spent in terms of maintenance on this vehicle? $2. I bought windshield wiper fluid. That's it. 16,000 miles, and I paid for windshield wiper fluid. Nothing else, right? Obviously, we're not factoring in fuel here, and this obviously would be electric. On these other vehicles, it is gas or diesel, right? No cost in 16,000 miles, right? If you have another car or whatever, truck, and you have to do every 3,000 or 5,000 miles, you're changing the oil, and that's $50 to $100 depending on the type of vehicle or what type of oil change you do, and other fluids that might have to be changed or other things that go on. That is astonishing, especially when you play that cost out over a longer period than 12 months, as we mentioned. So the cost of the vehicle is coming down in terms of the sticker price. The cost of the maintenance is going to continue to come down as the vehicles become more reliable. And a very simple example of how the vehicles can become more reliable is think about one of these other vehicles that is driving along on the road next to me. They have, say, for example, 20 or 2,000 moving parts in the vehicle versus this has maybe 25 moving parts. Now, you don't have to be super intelligent. You don't even have to think that hard. If you've got 2,000 possibilities for something to break versus 25, which one is going to spend more time broken in the life of the vehicle? Obviously, the one that has 2,000 potential break points for something to go wrong. And when you have 25 moving parts, you can make those 25 moving parts 100 times better so that the cost associated with downtime or maintenance completely comes down. So on the bottom side of the market relative to Toyota, Ford, GM, etc., the rest of the market, we have Tesla eating away at their market share, right? So they're dropping in sales. They're losing sales. You look at the global production volume or in terms of sales this year, 2020, and you get to see a long list of red. A lot of companies are losing sales, right? Except for one. That's Tesla. And they are gaining. So on the bottom side of the market, when we look at more micro data, we can see that Tesla's eating up all these other companies' shares. And you can just take a look at what happened with the Model S, what happened with Model X, and in those markets, Model S completely destroyed the other competition. I wouldn't even call it competition. I mean, it's like a professional sports player playing against somebody in high school. Like, there's no competition whatsoever. And that's what's happened. It mopped up the market for the Model S, mopped up the market for the Model X, Model 3, which I am driving, doing exactly the same thing. Model Y, which is still in the ramp, is going to do exactly the same thing. And in probably 24 to 36 months, there's going to be another $25,000 roughly vehicle that is going to, when you have a decrease in the cost of something, when you think about price elasticity, it doesn't, if you have a one-for-one, it's like if you have dropped the price of something by $1,000, that doesn't mean you get that many equivalent increase in sales. You actually get way more than that because the segment of the market that can purchase a $25,000 vehicle versus a $50,000 vehicle is way fucking bigger at $25,000 than it is at $50,000. So you get substantially more customers at that price. So when that is in the works at the same time, Tesla eating up the rest of the market from inside, and then on the macro view, we got the market fucking collapsing. What are these companies going to do? Probably file for bankruptcy, change into some other form of business that they can actually win in because they already lost. But now, what about, like, excuse me, why did I say that this is actually beneficial when it comes to all these people losing their job? Excuse me, all these people losing their jobs. Well, that's where we talk about the implicit costs. So we're just going to absolutely make numbers up out of our ass in terms of global people who are employed in the auto industry or the peripheral 1, 2, and 3 tier suppliers, and just arbitrarily make up a number and say it's 50 million people. You can say it's 75, you can say it's 36. I don't give a fuck what the number is. That is completely irrelevant to the point. And when you look at what is happening with autonomy and self-driving, you have self-driving vehicles, which is going to further drop the cost because the utilization rate of the vehicle is going to 10x or 6x or something. Instead of sending 12,000 miles a year on a vehicle, 150,000 miles could be put on a vehicle, 100,000 miles could be put on a vehicle every single year. And that is going to drastically drop the cost of TaaS. TaaS is transportation as a service. And like you can think of that as Uber, right? So if Uber was 75% cheaper, if you use Uber, you would probably use Uber more, right? So these costs that are going to go away, right? This 50 million people that we arbitrarily just made up who work in the suppliers that work for VW, Toyota, etc. are going to be drastically smaller. But now people who are incapable of utilizing a vehicle are going to be able to actually get around, right? And that's one portion of it. So that's going to affect arbitrarily 5 million people, right? Blind people, disabled people, children, old people, somebody where they can only afford one type of vehicle. Now they would just get rid of that, or just have that one vehicle, and the other person, if it's a family, will actually be able to get around because the cost is such a fraction of what it used to be. But then you also have things like this. I'm making this video while the car is in autopilot on the expressway going 80 miles an hour. I can do things in the car that allow me to be productive. Now, again, you don't have to be super intelligent to see this. If you have two businesses and you have one business that loses all this labor on an annualized basis of, say, I don't know, 200,000 hours because their people are driving, physically paying attention to the road, versus you have company B who is using autonomous technology and their workers are able to actually do something productive while they're driving. Who wins that battle in terms of like business? The one that's able to get fucking more shit done. That is exactly what's going to happen. So the impact is going to be way greater, right? Because now the total people in the industry, right, suppliers and directly working for Ford and GM, etc., we called that 50 million. Now we added 5 million for blind or disabled or old folks or children or just people who are now capable of getting around where they weren't able to from a cost prohibitive standpoint or other reasons able to do that. We'll call that 5 million. So there's a delta there of 45 million. But what happens when you have, say, several billion people? 2 billion, 1 billion, 6 billion, it's probably not anywhere near 6 billion, but a billion plus people that are now able to be more productive, right? And productivity doesn't have to be predicated on business, because not everybody likes business as much as I do. But what if that allows somebody to spend more time with their wife, and because they're spending more time with their wife, they have a deeper relationship, right? And that causes other types of benefits, right? Maybe less stress, maybe less mental cost on the system because they don't have mental disorders relative to anxiety or stress or depression, etc. And that there also is going to expand the market for services, say like Netflix or Amazon or anything that is digital as a service, any type of SaaS product. It's going to increase because there's going to be not only the total impact of, say, if people are using vehicles is 1 billion. So right now, in this moment, in the current state of the world, if there's 1 billion or 1.5 billion people that use vehicles on a daily basis or at least several times a week to get around, what do you think happens to that market when the cost is 80% less to get around? More people use it, just as we talked about. If you go from a $50,000 vehicle to a $25,000 vehicle, it doesn't just double the market size, it more than doubles the market, right? So the same thing happens when the cost of getting around drops. You go from, say, 1.5 billion people around the world who are able to use a vehicle to operate their life, right? But now it's a fraction of that. So now that addressable market goes from 1.5 billion to 2 billion to 3 billion, 4 billion, whatever that number is, because there's more people that are able to access that at a lower cost than at that higher cost. And those people can also now be more productive, just because if they had to, say, ride a bicycle or fucking walk or take a train or some other thing that took them much longer to do something, and now they're able to get into some type of vehicle and get around, they're able to be more productive. So whether that's 1 billion people or 3 billion people, now there's going to be a financial impact on those people, which is going to be way greater than that 50 million people. Those 50 million people are going to have to adapt. They're going to have to change. They're going to have to move forward in some capacity. And it's just not going to make sense from like a physical world standpoint to have vehicles like that one I just passed, because that requires some type of parking lot that is relatively close to where the person who drove the vehicle has to park the vehicle, right? And that's a pain in the fucking butt. Think about all of the parking spaces across, just here in the United States, that are going to go away, whether that's a 8 or an 18-year time frame. Those spots are going to be going away, and that is going to have a giant financial impact here in the United States across the board, even including 2008 and 2009, on an aggregate across the country. Rents for renting an apartment to live in did not go down. It basically flatlined when 2008 and 2009 happened. Housing prices came down, but rents are sticky. Rents did not come down. Rents just basically flatlined. And then they started to increase again. So now what happens when all of these parking lots start to transition to just being able to be developed to housing, right? There's going to be a financial impact from that, from whether it's the construction or all of the peripheral things associated with constructing a house, or not necessarily a house, but a building or a building of some sort, or a dwelling of some sort, is going to have a huge financial impact. So what Tesla's doing right now, through transitioning the entire planet to EVs and to an autonomous future, is going to have such a positive impact that is way greater than that 50 million people that are going to be displaced, and they're going to be screwed, just like truck drivers, right? I'm about to pass two truck drivers here. They're going to have to do something else. It's just what it is. The truck is going to be driving itself. It's going to cost less, and it's going to be way safer for the truck to drive itself. So I'd love to hear what your guys' thoughts are down below in the comment section. Don't forget to subscribe to see future videos like this, and I'll talk to you later.